Okay, so with disgust, I wanted to ask you a couple of things about that. So, you know, the Big Five research into political differences basically shows that the liberals are high in trait openness and low in trait conscientiousness, and the conservatives are the reverse. But we've fragmented conscientiousness into orderliness and industriousness with the Big Five aspect scale. And orderliness is strongly associated with disgust. So right.
Sounds like Freud.
Yeah. Right, exactly. It does sound a lot like Freud, yeah. but it also is in accordance with your observations that conservatives have neater spaces, for example. So now.
And their meetings start on time.
Yes, and yeah, exactly. Right. So then the nexus for political belief seems to be openness. So that's that exploratory tendency that you talked about, exploration of ideas and creativity, and low orderliness. And so then I thought, well, why in the world why would the political nexus go across those dimensions, which are some relatively uncorrelated? Then I thought, and this is in keeping with your work on disgust, is that it's an issue of borders, which of course seems more or less self-evident in the wake of Trump's election when he talked about borders. But you might say, and I think this is reasonable, that the conservative is someone who wants the borders between categories to remain intact no matter what level of analysis. So it's borders from the highest resolution level of cognition all the way up to the actual physical borders of rooms, towns, states, countries, all of that. So the borders should be thicker. And the reason they want that, now there was a paper published in PLOS One, I don't know if you saw it, it was a couple of years ago, it was a mind-boggling paper, it should have been like front page news as far as I was concerned. And what the researchers did was between countries and then within provinces or states within countries, they correlated the level of frequency of infectious disease with authoritarian political beliefs, and found a walloping correlation. It was like 0.6. It was one of the highest. For those of you who don't know, social scientists never discover anything that's associated with anything else at a correlation of 0.6.
Other than heritability.
Right, other than heritability, yes. And so what they found was that the higher the prevalence of infectious disease, the higher the probability of totalitarian or authoritarian political attitudes. And then they controlled for governance, because one of the questions was this top-down authoritarianism or bottom-up authoritarianism? And the answer was that it was bottom-up. Okay, and so I thought about that from two perspectives simultaneously. At the time, okay, so we identified disgust sensitivity with orderliness, so it's, say, a fundamental subtrait. Then I was reading this book that was called Hitler's Table Talk, and it was the recordings of virtually everything he said at dinner from 1939 to 1942. Yeah, so it's a spontaneous utterance, say, and it's full of discussions about Jews and gypsies and all the people he tormented, but what's really interesting is all the language is disgust. It's not fear. So Hitler's basic metaphor was that the Aryan race and country was a pure body, and that it was assaulted by parasites, right? And then I remembered what happened to the Native Americans when the Europeans showed up and shook hands. What happened was that 95% of them were dead within 50 years, right? Because of smallpox and measles. And so that border issue that separates conservatives from liberals, let's say, is the conservatives say the novel is potentially contaminating. It's not so much that it's dangerous, that's different, that's fear, it's contaminating. And the liberals say, hold on a minute, if you make the borders too thick, then information can't pass through.
Exactly. So that's the omnivore's dilemma right there.
Right. And then since we have a biological architecture on which our cognitive platforms are erected, we have the same attitude towards abstract information, which would be ideas, that we do to things like food or illness. Right. And so we can think of an invading idea or a polluting idea or a contaminating idea.
That's right. I'm a big fan of George Lakoff, metaphors we live by, that we use our bodily schemata to think about abstract things like politics and like what our policies should be about borders and immigration. There's a Canadian psychologist, Mark Schaller. He and his colleagues have developed what they call an account of the behavioral immune system.
Yeah, right.
That we don't just try to, microbes killed probably many more of our ancestors than did lions and tigers and bears. And so whoever can keep themselves and their children from being exposed to fatal illnesses wins the evolutionary game. And so a lot of that is judging carefully about people. Is he dangerous? Is she dangerous? And that's both for sexuality, for contact, for all kinds of association. So yeah, in a lot of ways, our emotions and our bodily interactions structure how we think and feel about social and moral.
Well, even with the Black Death in Europe, I mean, so the Black Death occurred in Europe when the Europeans started to move around the world, and they brought back rats that were infected. Exactly. So what you saw there was both of those forces at work at the same time. So the European expansion produced a tremendous interchange of ideas from all around the world. That's globalization, but it wiped out somewhere between 30 and 60% of the population at the same time.
So wouldn't it be good if in every society or every organization we had some people who specialized in saying, hey, what are the opportunities? And then we had other people who specialized in saying, well, but what are the risks? And it just so happens that a lot of people have trouble doing all that in themselves. When we have systems that are well constituted with people who have different personalities and different motives and goals, we actually can get better outcomes.
We can have a discussion between them. Yeah, well, that's exactly why. It's for that precise reason that I've been so interested in free speech as a value, because, well, even on the economic front, it's pretty obvious if you look at things economically that the entrepreneur types who start businesses are lumped in with the liberal creative types. We've done a lot of work on the prediction of entrepreneurial behavior and ability, and it's openness that's the big predictor. It's not the only one. It's openness and IQ fundamentally. But for managerial and administrative expertise, it's IQ and conscientiousness. So the liberals start businesses, but they can't run them because their interests flit and they don't have the organizational ability. And the conservatives can run them, but they can't continue to transform and expand them.
Yep. So yin and yang, yin and yang. Yep.
So one more thing about what happened in Nazi Germany that's very relevant and interesting, because it's useful to get these motives right. You know, first of all, if something disgusts you, if you're afraid of something, then you run away from it or you freeze. But if something disgusts you, you try to burn it or kill it, right? You try to get rid of it or expel it. That's right. You want to get it away and destroy it. So when Hitler first came to power, he put in a bunch of public health schemes, like he had vans that went around and screened people for tuberculosis. And then he went on a factory cleanliness campaign. So the factories were supposed to be tidied up. And he bathed about 4 times a day, by the way, and was also a great worshiper of willpower, which is associated with orderliness, and seems maybe to be associated with disgust sensitivity in some way that isn't yet understood. Yeah. I don't understand that connection either. So he convinced factory owners in Germany to get rid of the rats and the mice and the insects in the factories, and also to clean them up and beautify them. But the gas they used to clean up the factories was Zyklon A. And it was the variation of that gas, Zyklon B, that was then used in, so you could see this ramping up. So it was, absolutely. So it was public health, then it was social cleanliness, then he went into the asylums and cleaned them up. And so it was just this expansion of who was contaminated and who was impure. And I think also his fascination with fire and his use of fire symbolism was also associated with that appeal to purification, because the whole idea of purification by fire is a very ancient idea. So